So Thor Love and Thunder is the 29th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it follows the iconic God of Thunder as he faces off against Gore the God Butcher with the help of his ex, Jane Foster, who now has the powers of Thor. And right out of the bat, the first thing that I have to say is that this is without a doubt a spoiler review. So if you haven't seen the movie and you care about spoilers, pause this video, leave right now, watch the film, and then come back. Okay, now that those warnings are out of the way, I will give you all my thoughts about this film, but before I do that, I need to let you all know what my expectations were coming into this film and what my anticipation levels were before watching Thor Love and Thunder. And right out of the bat, the first thing that I have to say is that I am a huge MCU fan. I love the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I love their films, I love the MCU, I love their characters, and honestly, these are films that mean a lot to me. I grew up watching these films, I grew up watching these characters, and I would honestly go as far as to say that some of the best cinematic experiences I've ever had has been watching MCU movies. Therefore, when Thor Love and Thunder was announced, I couldn't have been more excited. You know, you had Taika Waititi returning to the MCU after proving himself with Thor Ragnarok. You know, you had him returning to write and direct. But not only that, you also have Taika Waititi adapting two of the best Thor stories from the comics ever. You know, stories written by Jason Aaron, which I absolutely adore. So yeah, I was extremely excited for Thor Love and Thunder. And in my mind, I thought nothing could go wrong. What could go wrong? Well, here we are. And, you know, that being said, I must also mention that I haven't been the biggest fan of MCU Phase 4. I have felt that most of the movies and TV shows that have come out as part of this phase have felt pretty meandering and aimless and unsatisfying and, if I'm being honest, a bit inconsequential. But, you know, I was hoping that Thor Love and Thunder was going to be that film that was going to prove me wrong. I was hoping that I was going to come out of this film, that I was going to come out of Thor Love and Thunder saying, yes, Marvel is back, the MCU is back, and it is as good as ever. I'm afraid I can't say that. And the reason why I can't say that is because Thor Love and Thunder is, quite honestly, the most disappointing film I've seen in 2022 so far. Mind you, I'm not saying it's the worst film I've seen in 2022, I'm just saying it's the most disappointing film, at least for me. And my biggest problem with this film, my biggest problem with Thor Love and Thunder, is without a doubt the fact that they grabbed two of the best Thor storylines, you know, Gore the God Butcher and the Mighty Thor, and they tried to cram both of them into a 1-2 hour long movie, and they just simply didn't have enough space or time to develop either of those correctly. And honestly, it baffles me because I don't understand why the hell they thought that they needed to cram both of these stories into one single film. You know, Thor facing off against Gore could have easily been one film. And then Thor coming to terms with the fact that his ex, Jane Foster, now has the powers of Thor, that could have very easily been another separate film. Why they decided to cram them, I have no idea. But as it is, trying to force both of the stories to coexist in one single 2-hour film, it just ended up feeling sloppy, lazy, and yeah, very, very underdeveloped and very half-baked. You know, in the comic books, these storylines, you know, the Gore the God Butcher storyline and the Mighty Thor storyline, they are epic, they are big, they are thought-provoking, they are really, really fucking great. But in this film, these storylines feel rushed, are tackled in a superficial way, and simply pale in comparison to their comic book counterparts. And I know what you're thinking. You know, if you haven't read the comic books and if you haven't read these different storylines, then, you know, you're probably thinking, Juan, take a chill pill. You know, it's fine. It was fine. You know, they did them good enough. You know, Gore the God Butcher was good enough and the Mighty Thor was good enough. They were fine. But that's exactly the problem. That's exactly my point. That these characters and these storylines are not just fine. They are freaking great. And the fact that this greatness wasn't translated to the big screen is honestly very, very sad and very, very disheartening. But okay, enough complaining from me. I think the best way for me to show you my point is to, you know, give you some insight into how these storylines worked in the comic books. That being said, I'm not going to summarize both of the stories because that would take me an eternity. I am just going to briefly summarize, you know, the Gore the God Butcher storyline from the comic books, and then I will let you guys be the judges. You know, you guys decide who did it better and what was, you know, lost in adaptation, I guess. Okay, so in the comics, Gore grew up in a very hostile planet that was more like a barren wasteland, and, you know, him and his tribe members were dying of starvation, sun fever, thirst. That said, it was fine because they were all, you know, huge believers in the gods, and they had faith that someday the gods will come down from the heaven and help them. That said, they never did. You know, in his childhood, Gore's father and mother died horrible, gruesome deaths. But it was fine because, you know, Gore's tribe members kept telling him that the gods would look after him, and, you know, it was all part of God's plan. Gore grew up in this, you know, hostile environment and in this horrible planet. He eventually started a family of his own. He got married and he started having children. Months later, Gore's wife and family started dying one by one due to many different reasons. And Gore prayed to the heavens. He prayed to the gods so that they would come down and help him. That said, they never did. Gore's entire family died. And it was at this point when Gore snapped. And when Gore was burying his final child, he cursed the heavens. He cursed the gods. And yeah, he honestly started believing that gods couldn't be good, because if they were good, then they would have never allowed something like this to happen. Gore's tribe turns against him, labels him as a blasphemer, and kicks him out of the tribe. Gore is then stoned publicly and is forced to wander the deserts for days, trying his best to survive. And at that moment, at the brink of death, right when he's gonna die, Gore finds the dying bodies of two gods that had been locked in combat. At that moment, Gore is so enraged that he picks up the sword of one of these two gods, he picks up one of his weapons, and he uses that sword to kill both of the gods, to finish them off. And it is at that point when Gore's purpose becomes clear, and when Gore realizes that his sole purpose in existence will be to murder every single god that he finds. Then, you know, after this origin story, Gore spends the next 2,000 years literally going from planet to planet, hunting down gods and murdering them ruthlessly. He either murders them or enslaves them. And in the comics, the reason why he also enslaves gods is because he needs to harness their powers in order to be able to create a device so powerful that will literally allow him to kill gods across all time and space. How badass is that? At the end of the storyline, Gore realizes that in his quest to destroy all gods, he has actually become what he hated the most. He became a god. In his quest to destroy all gods, Gore became immortal, shaped worlds, created life, gained followers, and murdered ruthlessly. In other words, he became a god. And it is there at that moment of realization where Gore realizes that he failed. It is at that moment when three different versions of Thor have to band together and have to come together to take down Gore. So that is Gore's storyline in the comics. Pretty freaking epic, if you ask me. Now, what is Gore's storyline in the movie? Well, his daughter dies. Then he meets a ridiculous-looking god who is an absolute asshole. Then he kills this god. Then he promises to kill all gods. Then he murders a bunch of gods. That said, he murders them off screen because, of course, you know, we can't see Gore the God Butcher murdering gods, right? You know, that wouldn't make any sense. But then, what he spends most of the time doing, what Gore the God Butcher spends most of the film doing, is kidnapping a bunch of children. Because, of course, nothing says God Butcher as much as kidnapping a bunch of children and taking them to a black and white planet. I have no idea what they were thinking. But yeah, you might ask yourself, why is he doing that? Why is Gore the God Butcher kidnapping children instead of butchering gods? And, you know, he does this because, and hear me out, this is his plan. This is Gore the God Butcher's plan in the film. He believes that if he kidnaps a bunch of Asgardian children, Thor will come rescue them. Which from the get-go makes absolutely no sense. You know, the whole thing about Gore, his whole shtick, is that he believes that all gods are selfish and don't care about his people. Therefore, he kidnaps a bunch of Asgardian children and hopes that Thor will come rescue him. Doesn't that completely contradict Gore's belief that all gods are selfish? Anyways, it doesn't matter. Gore kidnaps a bunch of children and he's, taking them to a black and white planet because he hopes that Thor will come rescue them. And the reason why he needs Thor to come rescue them is because Thor is using Stormbreaker, and Gore needs Stormbreaker to open a portal using the Biofrost and to go talk to Eternity. So yeah, that is his plan. That said, in the film, when Gore finally reaches Eternity, Thor convinces him to wish for his daughter back instead of wishing for, all the gods to be murdered. And, he does. He wishes for his daughter back. And then Gore the God Butcher dies. That is his storyline in the movie. So just to be clear, just for emphasis, in the comics, Gore murders and enslaves gods. In the movie, Gore kills some gods off screen, but most of the time he's just kidnapping a bunch of children. In the comics, Gore is defeated by 3 different versions of Thor after he realizes that he became what he hated the most. In the movie, Gore dies because the Necro Sword is poisoning him, but before he passes away, he changes his mind about his quest. You see what I mean? Gore's story in the film pales in comparison to what his story was in the comics. And this is not something exclusive to Gore's character. The same goes for Jane Foster's storyline. In the comics, there is build-up to the reveal that Jane is dying of cancer. And when they reveal this, it is sad and it is soul-crushing and it is heavy. Now, in the film, literally the first scene we see Jane Foster, they instantly let us know that she's dying of cancer. There's no build-up, there's no exploration, it's just there. In the comics, Jane becomes Thor because Thor Odinson has become unworthy, and she realizes that there must always be a Thor. Now, in the movie, Jane Foster becomes Thor because Thor Odinson whispered something to his hammer while they were still dating. You see what I mean? Gore and Jane pale in comparison to their comic book counterparts. And yeah, both Gore and Jane feel like simplified versions of their characters. It honestly feels as if someone at Marvel just, read through the storylines, read through these comic books, and just made a bullet point list of the most basic beats that they needed to cover in order for these characters to sort of work. And that's exactly how it feels. And I know what you're thinking. Come on, Juan, take a chill pill. It's an adaptation. Of course they're going to make changes. Of course they're going to simplify things. But that's exactly my problem. That you didn't need to simplify things this much. You just needed to give each of these characters, each of these storylines, their own unique film. Because as it is, you have a film where neither Gore or Jane can shine. They both feel half-baked in their own film. And that is a problem. Okay, so now that I've rambled enough about the story of this film and how the story elements pretty honestly disappointed me quite a bit, I think it is time that we move on to different elements of the film, and the first element that I want to discuss now are the characters. So when it comes to the characters, of course, I have to begin by talking about Thor. Okay, so Thor. The things that I liked about Thor were the love triangle with his weapons. I thought that was really well made and really, really funny. And I also liked his new looks. I thought he had some great new looks throughout this movie, and, that was a lot of fun. So the things that I disliked about the Thor character, first of all, I believe his character has regressed significantly. I feel he is extremely dumb now, even more than he used to be, to an egregious degree. I also found it very jarring to see that Thor in Thor Love and Thunder no longer cares about consequences and about the consequences of his actions. And this, in particular, is very jarring, especially considering the fact that the first Thor film was all about him realizing that he used to be an asshole, that he used to be a hot-headed asshole, and that his actions had consequences. That was his storyline in his first film. But now we have Thor 4, where all of that has regressed, and Thor is once again back to being an absolute douchebag who doesn't care about consequences. And in order to be able to see this, you only have to watch the opening scene for the film. In the opening scene of the film, Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy are, fighting against, this weird space Muppets. And you literally get an action scene where Thor is just completely destroying, this ancient temple that is very special to these alien species. And he just doesn't give a fuck. And it's like, oof, okay, this is not the same Thor that we used to know, I guess. But yeah. And the last reason why I say that the Thor character has regressed significantly is because I believe they keep reusing the same storyline over and over again for the Thor character. Like, seriously, how many Thor movies are we gonna get where Thor is trying to find himself? We did that with the first Thor film. We did that with Thor Ragnarok. We did that with Avengers Endgame. It's done. We don't need any more movies about Thor trying to find himself. It's honestly becoming a bit uninspired, if I'm being honest. I also disliked some of his new abilities, which, if I'm being honest, make absolutely no sense. Like, at the third act of this film, when Thor and a bunch of children are about to face off against Gore and his army of faceless minions, you know, the fact that Thor just gathers all the children and tells them, like, oh, if you believe hard enough, you are gonna have the power of Thor. How does that make any sense? Where were these abilities? If Thor was able to do that before, why didn't he use this in, I don't know, Infinity War, Endgame, any of the Avengers films, any of his previous films? I don't know, it just felt extremely cheap and, yeah, like an ability that made absolutely no sense. Now, the last thing that didn't quite work for me when it comes to Thor's storyline is the ending to his story. So, by the end of the film, Thor has a daughter, and first of all, good for Chris Hemsworth. You know, I think it is great that he managed to get his daughter inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That is amazing, and I'm sure it was a lot of fun to film those scenes with her. And, you know, they have a lot of chemistry with one another, which makes sense because, you know, they are actually related. That being said, from a story perspective, I honestly don't think this ending made a lot of sense to the story that they had set up. And the reason why I bring this up is because there was absolutely no setup to Thor wanting or needing a daughter throughout the film. At the beginning of the film, they set it all up as if this whole movie is about Thor finding himself. But then, by the end of the film, you pay off this storyline by giving Thor a daughter? So the message is, if you're having an identity crisis, just get a daughter? Thank you, Marvel. Great advice. Okay, now the next character I want to discuss is Gore the God Butcher. And I know, I've already talked enough about Gore the God Butcher. Hear me out. I'm going to be talking about some different points. I'm going to be talking about some different things. So first of all, the things that I liked about Gore the God Butcher. I love Christian Bale. I think he's one of the best actors working today. And I thought he brought it all to the table for Gore the God Butcher. Like, you know, he gave it his all. He gave it his 1000%. And it was honestly amazing. I wish he would have been more in the film, and I wish he would have played a bigger part in the movie. I also really liked some of the visuals associated to the Gore character. You know, I love the way this character just, you know, came out of the shadows, and, you know, I loved his silhouette, and I loved what they did with the black and white, but then his eyes maintaining, like, that red amber color. I thought from a visual perspective, Gore looked really, really cool. And now the last thing that I really liked about Gore the God Butcher were his fight scenes. I thought his fight scenes were really, really great. That said, they were great when he fought. Because sadly, most of the times when characters were facing off against Gore the God Butcher, Gore would just stand in the background while his faceless minions would be the ones doing the fighting. And that just infuriated me. I also didn't like Gore's new design for the film. You know, the whole thing about Gore is that he is an alien from a completely different world, from a completely different universe. Therefore, it makes no sense that in the film, Gore the God Butcher is just pale Christian Bale. Like, he's just pale Christian Bale with some face tattoos. Like, how the hell is that an alien? Honestly, I thought the design from the comic books was already really freaking great. You know, I love that design. It's very iconic, it's very menacing, and it's, you know, it's very eye-catching and original. But they decided to change it to just like a generic pale villain. And I get it, you know, you're hiring Christian Bale. You want people to be able to see his face. You want people to be able to see his acting. And, you know, if you wanted to change his design, that is fine. But at least make him intimidating. At least make him look like a villain. Not like pale Christian Bale with face tattoos. What the hell was that? Now, another thing that I disliked about Gore the God Butcher is how he barely killed any gods throughout the film. Like, honestly, he only kills one god on screen. Every single other god that he kills after that, it's off screen. What's the point? You bring in Christian Bale to play a character that is called Gore the God Butcher. At least let him kill a couple of gods. at least make it cool, you know, at least make these kills on screen. But yeah, the only god that he kills on screen is not even a cool kill, is not even a satisfying kill. You know, it's the first god he kills, and he kills him while he's just monologuing and talking. Like, it's not even an epic moment, it's just the beginning of his story. And yeah, every single one of Gore the God Butcher's kills in the comic books are so iconic, so badass, and so cool. And the fact that we didn't get the chance to see any of those in the movie, we just saw the aftermath and we just saw a couple of dead corpses, that's really f***ing insane. Okay, the next character that I will touch upon will be Jane Foster, and when it comes to Jane, the things that I liked are Natalie Portman. I think she's a great actress, she's very, very talented, and it is great to see her back in the MCU. You know, it is great to see her having another chance at the character of Jane Foster. I also really liked her new looks. I think her looks in this film are really cool and really freaking badass. And last but not least, I also really liked the way she used Mjolnir. You know, I liked these new abilities. I like the way in which Mjolnir just, you know, divides itself into the many different pieces and then, you know, comes back. That was all really, really cool. Now, the things about Jane Foster that I didn't like are, first of all, her terrible jokes about catchphrases that keep coming back throughout the film over and over again. I don't think I laughed at any of those. That said, the film kept shoving them down my throat, and by the end, they just became infuriating. Now, the next character I will discuss will be Zeus. And when it comes to Zeus, what I liked was nothing. And what I disliked was the fact that they finally introduced Zeus in the MCU. They bring in Russell Crowe, and they turn him into an absolute f***ing joke who is only talking about having orgies the whole way through. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you needed to make Zeus a good guy. I'm not saying that you needed to make him a hero. You can keep him an asshole. Just at least make him even the slightest bit intimidating. The last thing I will say about Zeus is, what the f*** was Russell Crowe doing? Honestly, like, does anyone know what the hell was Russell Crowe doing? Like, his accent, his movement, his performance, like, what the hell was that? What a huge disappointment, if I'm being honest. Now, the next group of characters that I will talk about are the Guardians of the Galaxy. What I liked about the Guardians of the Galaxy is it was great seeing them again, I guess. I like these characters, so it was fun to see them again. Now, what I disliked about these characters is that they are only in the first 10 minutes of the film, and that is it. What was the point of the setup at the end of Avengers Endgame if you're only gonna have the Guardians in this film for the first 10 minutes and that's gonna be it? What was the point of having Thor team up with the Guardians of the Galaxy after defeating Thanos if this is what you're gonna do with these characters? Honestly, this just felt like a waste of time, and it felt like there was no point in having the Guardians of the Galaxy in this film. Now, the last characters that I will be talking about are the Screaming Goats. And when it comes to the Screaming Goats, what I liked about them was the first time they screamed. Funny shit. And what I disliked about them was every single time they screamed after that. So in conclusion, Thor Love and Thunder was a very mixed bag. And it was an incredibly frustrating film. They honestly shouldn't have crammed the two best Thor storylines into a single film, because as it is, this movie ended up being very messy and very all over the place. It is fine. It's an okay film. But it is nothing compared to what it could have been. Honestly, if I were to give it a score out of 10, I would give it a 5 out of 10, which means I thought this film was meh. And in all honesty, the last thing I will say is that I am very disappointed in the MCU. I feel like ever since Avengers Endgame, most films and TV shows have felt very meandering and aimless. You know, it honestly feels like they are trying so damn hard to manufacture spectacle that they have forgotten that first and foremost, the most important thing they need to have this film succeed are good stories. And yeah, I've honestly felt like Marvel has lost its magic. And that makes me very, very sad.